In this lecture, we're going to look at the event loop and some other methods that are available to you to handle events in your application. When you run your Qt application, you start something we call an event loop. This is triggered by the Q application exec call in your main CPP file usually. If we look at our last project here, this is the main CPP file. You see we prepare our things, we prepare the widget we're going to show, and later we run the exec method. And if you look at it in the documentation, let's go there. It enters the main event loop and waits until exit is called. This is going to keep waiting for events to happen in your application. So after we run exec, we enter this event loop that keeps looping, waiting for events to happen. And you see down here, I have a simplified representation of the event loop. While the application is running, it keeps looping on the queue that contains our events. And when it finds an event, it sends that to the application to be processed. So for example, when we show this application, if it wasn't visible, the Windows system is going to send us an event and it's going to land in this queue. And when the loop finds it, it's going to send it. This is what I mean here. So when an event is dispatched or sent to your application from the event loop, Qt calls QApplicationNotify. And this method is going to call specific event methods on QObjects. For example, the QWidget class has an implementation of the event method. It is going to call that. The event method in turn is going to call specific event handlers that you have in your object. This might be like mouse press events, key press events, and all the things we saw in the last lecture. So why am I showing you this? I am showing you this because it is through these points that we get chances to handle events. We have seen the specific events like mouse press, mouse move, mouse release, key press, but we can also re-implement the QEvent method. Right before these specific events are called, we can catch the event and try to handle it before these guys here are called. We can even one level up and re-implement QApplicationNotify and have access to events before any part of the Qt application has a chance to work on these events. So I hope by now you have a big picture of how things happen when you run the application, and we're going to move on and explore some of these methods. Now we want to look at QApplicationNotify in more detail. Here we have some details about it. This is the signature of the notify method. We have the receiver. This is the object that is going to receive the event. And the event is the specific event that is sent to an object in your application. We can override this method in our QApplication subclass and hijack events before they are delivered to their destination in our Qt application. Another thing you should know is that this function is called for any event that is sent to your application. So this is a very dangerous place, and you can seriously choke your application if you're not careful about what you do in that method. I personally don't recommend to try and handle events there, but it is one way that is available to handle events, and I want you to be aware of it. Now I want to go to the documentation and see what they say about this method. I am going to go in the search here and type in notify, see if I can find it. Let's see what we have here. We have Q application. We have Q core application. This is what we want. So we have the notify method. It sends the event to the receiver and returns the value that is returned from the receiver's event handler. The key things to retain here is that it sends the events to the receiver. If you go down here, you're going to see future direction. They say some things are going to change about this method in the future. This is one more reason you shouldn't really use it. It's not going to be stable in future versions of Qt. It may even be deprecated in the future, so you shouldn't really do this. But I just wanted you to know that it is one way you can handle events, and we're going to see how you do this exactly in the next lecture. You can also subclass QObjectEvent. For example, you see here that we have an implementation of it on the QWidget class. So we can re-implement this method and catch events before specific event handlers have been called and influence what happens in our application. We're also going to see that in a few upcoming lectures. We're going to see a demo and actually play with this and see how this happens. And here we have the recommended way to handle events. It is to go through the specific event handler methods in your object. We have mouse press event here as an example, but you already know that there are many more events you can play with, like key press events, context menu events, and many more. Now, I want to talk about event propagation because you're going to see this mentioned a lot in the Qt documentation. Event propagation describes how events that are not handled by child classes can be propagated up to be handled by parent classes. If you go to the documentation of the notify method that we just looked at, let's actually come back here in Qt Creator and look at that. For certain types of events, the event will be propagated to the receiver's parent and so on up to the top level object if the receiver is not interested in the event. Okay, this is what they mean by event propagation. As an example, you see that we have a subclass of QLineEdit here, and it is overriding press and release events. If we go to the implementation of this, you see that we do nothing in here except calling the parent implementation of these events here, key press event and key release event. And this is really how event propagation happens. You propagate the event up to the parent by calling the parent implementation. And I really want to stress this. Some parts of the Qt documentation say that if you don't handle an event, the event will be propagated back to the parent. And some students may think that you can just call event ignore here and the event is going to be propagated. That's not how things happen. You have to call the parent implementation for the event to actually propagate back to the parent. So read here, for event propagation to work, you have to call the parent implementation in your subclass override as we did here. This is commented out, so the event is not going to propagate back, but if we uncomment this, it's going to propagate back. And we're going to have a chance to play with this in a few upcoming demos. Another thing we're going to use to handle events in this chapter is event filters. And a filter is an object you hook into another object to listen in on events before the object has actually received the events. This is really powerful. To create a filter, you just create a class that subclasses QObject, and then you implement the event filter method as we see here. And if you install the filter, you're going to receive events before the actual object has received events. Here we have an example of how you would do that. We have a class that subclasses QObject. We have a constructor that is really not going to do anything special, but we have the event filter here. If we look to the implementation, it is checking to see which event it was, and we are trying to do some things depending on the key that we received here. It's not important what we do here. Right now, I just want you to have the big idea of an event filter. You can hook that into an object and receive events before the destination has received the event. You see that here we have the destination. If we want to do something with it, we can actually use that. Okay, now that we have more concepts, we're going to look at this picture again and kind of recap different ways we have available to us to handle events. You can subclass the QApplication notify on your QApplication object. You can handle events there and actually influence how things happen before the events are sent to other parts of your application. You can subclass QObject event, like we saw that you can do that on the QWidget class. And this is going to give you a chance to handle events before specific event handler methods have been called. You can also use filters. You can install an event filter on your QApplication object and handle events there before they go in other parts of your application. You can also install an event filter on your object. And last but not least, you can do the most recommended thing really to use your specific event handler methods to handle your events. Now that you have a big idea of how you can handle your events, in the next few lectures, we're going to see each of these methods in more detail, starting in the next lecture. I'll see you there.